Hi everybody! So I realized I went off on a rabbit trail at the beginning of this review talking about my experience with all things Game of Thrones, how I led up to this season, and how I got my wife caught up. So if you want to skip all that, because you're probably not here for that, you can click on the time code I put in the comments section below, and that will take you directly to the review of this season. If you want to watch it, you can. Just giving you guys the choice because you don't have all day. What is up, Flick fans and Game of Thrones fans? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking Season 8 of Game of Thrones. This is a full spoiler review, even though I've kind of already talked about the majority of the season in all of my individual episode reviews. Those are all on my channel right now. I actually skipped an episode because the episode prior, just a lot of hatred in the comments, and we were busy that night, so I'm like, you know what? I'm probably not going to do a video right now. So 5 out of the 6 episodes, I did reactions and then moved away from that and went towards reviews on my channel. Those are on there right now. You can check those out. But right now, we're just going to kind of recap this season and unpack our thoughts, and I need you guys to be doing that in the comments section as I am talking. This is your space and place to talk about Game of Thrones. Listen, I know it's been a very divisive season. It's been a very divisive time in people's lives. They love this show. They hold this show very close to their hearts, and I do as well. I've been watching this show since season 1, way back when, and whether you started when the episode premiered for the very first time, or whether you started watching 2 months ago to binge the entire series just to get to this season, if you did that, I applaud you. That's actually what my wife and I did. So I watched the show for the second time all the way through with my wife over the last few months. I believe we started at the end of January, and she was watching the show for the very first time. She got all caught up. She was just as invested in these characters as I was, and we were both very excited to see where the season goes. And if you guys have missed any of the other videos, in those videos, I tell you, I've never read the books, so I have zero attachment to anything from that interpretation of this story. Therefore, anything that happened in the TV show, that is my knowledge base of Game of Thrones. And a lot of people ask, Austin, why did you not start covering Game of Thrones until this season? Why did you never hit it when the iron was hot, or really talk about it, get in depth, get in deep when season 5 and 6 and 7 were happening? Well, during the earlier seasons, I actually didn't even have a YouTube channel. It wasn't until, I believe, season 6 or even maybe season 7, I was full into YouTube. I was about to graduate college, so I was making reviews like a crazy person. Guys, it's been almost 2 years since season 7. The hiatus has been so long. 2 years ago, I barely even had a YouTube channel. Now, I have the opportunity to talk about Game of Thrones, and people just, it's so divisive. Understandably so, because they did make decisions in this season that I disagree with and I wasn't a big fan of. I wish I was able to review the seasons that I love more than anything, because regardless of how we feel about season 8, and I throw myself into this category, I'm not saying you have to, but I can't personally look back at the other seasons and say, well, because this one didn't necessarily work for me, those are bad. That's not how I look at it. I still see Game of Thrones as one of the most inventive and incredible and engaging shows on television. The closest thing we have ever had to a cinematic experience on the small screen. Game of Thrones broke boundaries. It changed the game in terms of television, and a lot of people want to blame Benioff and Weiss for this season, and because they're blaming them for this season, for some reason in their head they're thinking Benioff and Weiss, they're the worst people in television history. And I'm seeing it on Twitter, and it's the what have you done for me lately mentality, because did you forget the first 5 or 6 seasons that people were saying, well, this is the best TV show ever, it's breaking boundaries, it's doing things we've never seen before? It's Benioff and Weiss. It's the same people that did that. And yes, they're taking from the books, and the books did stop at a certain point, but videos have been surfacing today on Twitter of George R.R. Martin coming out and saying, listen, my ending is not that much different from the ending of the show, so it's really not that much different from what the show gave us. And Twitter, all I am seeing is, screw you, Benioff and Weiss, George R.R. Martin. If you had this and you had the opportunity, you would knock it out of the park. And I'm thinking, is his ending, because you know they collaborated, they talked to each other, he probably gave them an outline of where his books are heading, so do you think they went that drastically different from the books, unless he told him a lie and he's like, psych, I wasn't doing that, I'm doing this. That would actually be funny. I would read the books at that point. I still need to read the books. But it's like I just said, it's what have you done for me lately? It's like they forget all of the other incredible things this show has ever done for us. And I know some people in my comments right now are like, Austin, what are you talking about, man? These guys are the worst people in history. That's fine. If you feel that way, it's fine. I'm taking nothing away from you. I just feel like this video is a therapeutic opportunity for me to just kind of hash out my thoughts on this entire thing, this entire process, and the Game of Thrones fan base, which I'm including myself in because I am a part of this fan base. I have never seen a fan base so divided. DC, that's nothing anymore. The Star Wars fan base, all of the negativity that came from that, The Last Jedi, no. Game of Thrones is the most divided I have ever seen in my life. It is incredible, and it is a testament to how much people love this show, because if they didn't love this show, they would not be getting this pissed off. It's not like they're getting pissed off because they had no attachment to it whatsoever. No, if you don't care about something, you don't care about it. You don't riot in the streets and throw fits on the internet. No, you just don't care. It's because people love this show so much, and I am a part of that club, because even after season 8, finally getting into the review, I know somebody's going to comment and say,
he didn't start talking until the 45-minute mark.
I still think Game of Thrones is magnificent as a whole. I still love the show. It holds some of the best performances and the best score and some of the best cinematography I have ever seen on any medium, television or movies. I think it is phenomenal, even after this season. And this season had those things in there. The performances were immaculate. You cannot look at me and tell me one person was giving a horrible performance, because I would be so utterly confused as to who you were talking about. All of the performances were golden. I think Tyrion, Peter Dinklage, I think he'll get an Emmy nomination. I think there are Emmy nominations to go around this entire cast this season, because the acting was magnificent. The look of this season. This is the most cinematic looking season we have ever seen, even though there were complaints about episode 3 because it was a very dark episode, and I tend to agree with those sentiments. But the rest of the season looked spectacular. The special effects, you could tell they had large budgets, the biggest they've ever had for each individual episode. And then the soundtrack, the score, everything audible about this season of television was phenomenal, down to the sound effects. Now, there were a few issues in terms of leaving coffee cups and water bottles on set, and at first I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. I mean, it's happened before. It happened in Downton Abbey. It's happened everywhere. People have forgiven that in the past, and then it happened again, and then it happened in this most recent episode. And at this point, I'm like, could you guys not pay more attention? Because you know there are people on set, and that is their specific job. If there's not, there should have been, to find out whether or not there is a prop on the set that does not need to be there, aka a water bottle or a coffee cup. It got to the point to where it really frustrated me, because you guys, this is Game of Thrones. You should not be making mistakes like that 3 times in a row. But let's get down to what everyone wants to talk about, and that is the plot of season 8. Now, I've said this before, and I will say this again. When something comes out and it does not meet the expectations of the fans, whatever that may be, whether it's a Marvel movie, a DC movie, Game of Thrones at this point, I didn't know that fell into that category until this most recent season, but it usually causes the fan base to turn against it. We've been seeing a lot of cases of that lately, and some of it does have to do with the fact that people have Twitter now, and they have YouTube channels, and they can create usernames to where people don't know where they live or who they are, so they can say anything and believe that they get away with it, even though they're dead inside. And I'm not saying that's the case for most of you guys, because honestly, the comments in my last 2 episode reviews have been fantastic. Some incredible points being made in the comments. Like I said in the last video, you actually caused me to go back and think of Jaime's storyline a bit more, and how much it actually did frustrate me. And it did frustrate me to no end the more that I thought about it. So really, the comment sections on my videos, for the most part, have been really awesome and super constructive, and you've definitely made it known that you loved it or you hated it, but that's fine. I have nothing against passion. What I do have things against is the fact that people are coming out and cursing at each other and telling each other that they should fall off of a cliff and die, and it's that kind of attitude that just really bugs me, especially towards a show that should be something to unite fanboys and nerds and geeks and people who love pop culture like myself. This should be the show to do that, and I get it. This season wasn't the best season, but that should not cause people to say things in that vein and in that nature. Now, the season itself, there were things I didn't like I said, and I've already talked about it. Jaime's story arc, let me start with him because he is one of my absolute favorite characters. Where he was in season 1, where he ended up in this season, to me, he was the same character, but he should not have been because everything in between that point, he was on an arc, and the arc was causing me to really love Jaime as a character, and he was about to become one of the main heroes. And then by the time you get to the end of the season, he kind of reverts back to what he was in season 1. And I have heard arguments for that fact. And I'm like, you know what? I can see where you're coming from. One of my really good friends, he loved Jaime's story arc and the fact that Cersei died with her brother's arms around her neck, which was in the prophecy. Well, nobody was strangling her. She died with Jaime's arms around her neck. And yes, that's sweet if you really think about it. But Jaime had great character development until he made that decision. All I needed was a line from Jaime saying, hey, I'm going back to kill Cersei. I don't love her anymore. I'm just doing this. I'm not going to tell anybody except for maybe Brienne that I'm doing it, but I'm doing it because I know it's right. And we never got that. Therefore, I was very disappointed with where his story ended up. Same with Cersei. Cersei had nothing to do this season. She has been built up so well, and she's had seasons devoted to her, sure, and they've had time to build her up as the villain, sure, so she didn't need to do too much, but I believe she needed to do more than she actually did. She just kind of stood there and looked out above that balcony for the entire season. I'm like, Cersei needs more than this. She's a grand character, an incredible character, and she deserves more. Now, the entire storyline with the White Walkers and the Night King, I really like how they handled most of that in episode 3. I was one of the few people, I guess, at this point, to be on board completely for where this season was headed after episode 1. In episode 2, I'm like, I like that it's this slow. I like that we're building up. I like that we're kind of tying all of these wonderful storylines in a bow to where they get undone in the next episode. I really enjoyed that, and I was excited to see the payoff in episode 3. And while episode 3, I have said the complaint about it being really dark, and I went back, tried to watch it again, still dark on my TV. Maybe it's my internet. I don't know. I watched it on streaming. But then you have the fact that there were just certain things off about that episode. Overall, I really enjoyed that episode. But you have, where was the dragon the entire time? I know the dragon was fighting the other dragon, but you burned down King's Landing pretty easily. Why couldn't you just do more during the battle? And why would you sacrifice your army like that? Just decisions made in that episode that kind of nudged me in the wrong direction. But overall, like I said, the fact that Arya was the one to kill the Night King. Look, everybody wants to build this Night King up as this villain that he never really was. I mean, he was always standing at the forefront of the armies, and he was always leading the charge, and he was always there staring ominously, but he never actually did or said anything that was super like, all right, this is one of the best villains I've ever seen in my life. He's one of the coolest villains, coolest looking at least, but he never really packed the punch that I think everyone was building him up to be. It's kind of like Boba Fett in Star Wars. The Night King did way more, obviously, but Boba Fett was always built up to be this thing that I don't think he ever was in the first place, and apparently the Night King is not even in the book. Somebody told me that the other day. They may have been lying, but that kind of shocked me because fans love the Night King so much, and the people that are so attached to the books are some of the ones who are saying this season was complete rubbish. So it's like, you really like the Night King, but he wasn't in the books. Like, I don't know. That is all confusing to me. Once again, I'm behind because I'm just attached to the material on TV. But really, Arya in general, I liked her a lot this season. I thought she was really great until the final episode when they just did not give her a lot to do. Same with Sansa. I have grown to love Sansa as a character. I would have been okay with seeing her on the Iron Throne or ruling over everyone at the end. We didn't see that, but I did like the moment to where she got that crown placed on her head. That was kind of poetic. The entire final episode was poetic in its own way, and there were certain story elements that I really, really enjoyed, but we'll get into that here in just a second. Then we move into the other Stark, Jon Snow, and Jon Snow's storyline is another one for me to where They never really brought up things in the final episode that they should have brought up. I would have loved to have seen a scene of Jon being torched by Drogon after he killed Dany at the end, and then you realize, oh my gosh, he is who he said he is, instead of Drogon just burning down the throne, which I liked. Another moment that I really enjoyed in the final episode, but there were story elements of Jon's that they never hit on, I believe, as hard as they could have hit on it. And another character, my favorite character in the entire series, barely over Jaime and barely over the Hound. The Hound is another storyline. When he tackled the mountain, I loved that moment in that episode. It was fantastic. His story in general, it was one of the more concrete in this season. I don't think enough people are talking about it because he's one of my favorite characters. But Tyrion, he became less intelligent as the seasons went on. And this season, I believe, and he does admit this in the final episode, so I did like that, but he's just a bit more dumb than he used to be. He was making bad decisions. He did things that he should have never done, that his character 4 seasons ago would have never done. Now, I did think he got due justice in the final episode because he ended up where I think he should have ended up, right next to the new leader of everyone. And I did like the conversations and the heart that Peter Dinklage showed in this character. But once again, his character was just underserved for me in this final season. And then we get into Dany, and this was the story arc that everyone was completely blown away by when she turned into the Mad Queen in the penultimate episode. And once again, this is a decision that I saw coming. I just didn't see it coming in this way. I didn't see it coming this drastically. I actually didn't think they were going to do it. I just saw it as a possibility of, okay, they've been planting seeds all throughout the seasons of the possibility of her turning in this direction. And I like that they have done it, but it was the drastic nature of the turn. It was the drastic nature of where her character ended up at the end of episode 5 of this season. That's what kind of blew me away. It wasn't going after Cersei. It wasn't even burning down the army. I understand why she would have done those few things. She lost everyone around her except for Tyrion and all of the people who have been whispering in her ear for season after season after season, telling her, you know what, this might not be the best idea. She didn't have anyone at that point telling her, you know what, this might not be the best idea. Therefore, she did what she was going to do, and that was burn down everything. And that's the thing about that entire sequence is I don't buy the fact that she would go after the innocent people in King's Landing. I don't buy the fact that she would do it on that level like she did it in that episode. It was just too much. And the biggest detriment I have for the season, and you guys have heard me say this in the past, I'm going to say it again, it was too short. 6 episodes was not enough, and I've been feeling it throughout the entire season, but this last episode really cemented for me that it was too short. We did not have time to flesh out all of these storylines, and one thing that I did not want about the last episode, I don't want a Lord of the Rings Return of the King ending. I love that movie. It was great for that movie, but this is Game of Thrones. This is something completely different. I don't want it to fade to black, and then, oh, it's going to end here, and it doesn't end, and oh, it's going to end here, and it doesn't end. And it did that multiple times. And I get it, you have to wrap up these storylines and you have to do this and say that, but the dialogue cut off about 10 minutes before the episode ended. It was just a lot of walking and a lot of presentation and a lot of, oh, that's really sweet after all of this murder and death. And I didn't need a lot of murder and death. I just needed an ending that captivated me and made all of these drastic mistakes better than they were handled when I first saw them, and I did not get that ending. I think the last 30 minutes of the final episode, it was just 30 minutes of, okay, I guess I don't agree with this decision. I like this decision, but I'm not a big fan of this one. It was just a constant back and forth for me, and that's not what I want from Game of Thrones. I don't want to be back and forth. I want to be all there on every decision. I was talking earlier in this review of people reacting to the fact that this series does not deliver on what you want it to deliver on, defying expectations and doing things that you don't expect. Game of Thrones has always done that. So why are fans just now revolting and going after critics who love it and going after other fans who love it? Well, it's because, in my opinion, the decisions made in this season, they weren't necessarily, all of them, I think some of them were, all of them warranted because there wasn't enough time spent developing these characters and these characters in those certain situations. Now, I did read in my comment section last night, a lot of people were on board with the last episode. A lot of people love the decisions. The decision to make Bran, I'm not even talked about Bran yet. Bran, let's talk about this. Bran is my least favorite, or, well, least interesting character in Game of Thrones. The Three-Eyed Raven storyline, it started out great. I loved everything with Hodor. All of those storylines were awesome. And then at a point, I just kind of got bored of it, and it was the least interesting storyline in Game of Thrones for me. And the fact that they made Bran the leader over everyone, and it makes sense for the storyline, all right? If you think about it, they were planting seeds and setting certain things up and lines of dialogue that he has had throughout the season. But for me, and a lot of people were asking me, what'd you think about Bran being? It's just the fact that I don't think the character is very interesting. And you made one of the least interesting characters for me, the person who was basically, not technically, but basically on the Iron Throne at the end of the day. And that for me is a decision that is always going to leave me a bit sour. I don't see it as something I'm necessarily going to come to terms with and say, you know what, I really like that decision. It does, once again, make sense for the storyline and where it was headed and the idea of a democracy. I said it last night. I really like that idea. That's where Game of Thrones has been heading for a long, long time. So it's not like it was an out of the blue decision. A lot of people are wanting to blame it on the writers once again, and you can blame it on the writers, but not the fact that it was out of the blue. It's just the fact that Bran? That was your choice? But that's the thing about this show. What's the most recent thing you're going to remember about Game of Thrones? Well, of course, it's the last few episodes, the final season, and a lot of people are just not going to forget how much they hated that. Therefore, they're going to look back on this series and say, you know what, I hate Game of Thrones and everything about it. I don't want to do that because I do still love this show overall in general. It's still one of my favorite shows of all time. Was I disappointed by many decisions in this season as a whole? Absolutely. And I did have issues with certain things, and I know other people had different issues than me, similar issues than me, and once again, I am claiming to know absolutely nothing. I am just a fan who likes to sit here in front of his apartment wall covered in nerdy comic booky things, and I like to talk about the things that I like to talk about. And Game of Thrones is something, regardless, love this season, hate this season, it started a conversation. It has gotten people talking. It is one of the highest watched seasons of television of all time, and we're in a good place in terms of where TV is right now. Mostly streaming, but really television in general, because the quality of the shows we are getting, they are just so high. And even though I do think this season was somewhat of a disappointment, it is still a better season of television than very mediocre shows with great seasons. This season is better than a great season of a mediocre show just because of the quality, the technical aspects, the acting. It's all so good from a critiquing, a critical standpoint, except for certain elements of the story, and those are the things that fell flat for me about this season. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I know I have talked and talked and talked. Once again, this was a discussion, but I need you guys in the comments below. Let me know, what did you think about Game of Thrones Season 8? Do you want me to do a full series review? I do have an idea in the fold, and it's something I'm a little nervous to do, but I want to give you guys my top 10 television shows of all time. It's a video I want to spend a lot of time on, and if you guys want that, let me know. If you don't want it, I won't do it. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. I'll be back this week with more things. Aladdin at some point, so that's gonna be a thing. Thank you guys. I'll catch you later.